There are no North Koreans fighting in Ukraine. This is absolute bullshit. It's never been true. He doesn't need any North Koreans to fight there. Interestingly enough, when the president of Korea, who launched this putsch to try and make himself dictator of South Korea in perpetuity, one of the things that he kept harping on was, well, you need to send South Korean troops to Ukraine to fight with NATO. Well, that went over like a lead balloon with the Korean people. They said, first of all, we don't believe there are any North Koreans in Ukraine. People actually had this common sense to say, we don't believe it. Secondly, we're not going there. We're not fighting outside of Asia. We're not fighting outside of Korea. We're not going to do it. Now, his attempt failed miserably. His attempt at martial law was crushed by the parliament. He's finished. He's going to be impeached and probably will go to prison. And he's a lackey for the United States. He's a puppet. He's exactly the kind of puppet that we like, just like Rutte, just like Stoltenberg, like Sisi in Egypt, and like Abdullah, sadly, in Jordan. They would like to get rid of Assad in Syria and put another puppet there. This is part of the larger strategic approach. It's failing miserably. I think Americans have got to step back and say, when are we going to be told the truth? And the only way that's going to happen is if Donald Trump comes in as president of the United States, I hope he's doing it now, but I have my doubts, and demands the truth. What is the truth? Stop telling me all the crap that comes over the mainstream media, because most of the people I know don't believe it. That's what you should tell them. Now, tell me what the truth is. Tell me what the real losses are, because you'd think Ukraine was winning after losing over 600,000 dead on the battlefield to the Russians. And that's a conservative estimate now. I remember when people thought that was high, but now people are privately telling me that's conservative. We don't know how bad it is, but we know that Ukraine is a dying nation. So when is President Trump going to say, I want the truth? Don't come in here and try to BS me. Now, let me stop for a second. This is not the first time these kinds of things have happened. When Richard Nixon decided that he wanted to begin the strategic arms limitation talks with the Russians, he turned to Kissinger and said, we've got to know the truth. And Kissinger said, what do you mean? He said, what you and I must know what the Soviets really do have and what they don't have and what their capabilities are. He said, this stuff that comes over from the CIA is just outrageous. It's all inflated. It can't all be true. And Kissinger said, you're right. And he made the decision to bring the station chiefs from the Central Intelligence Agency in Eastern Europe and other locations around the world that shared a border with or some sort of interest with Russia to come to Washington and brief him in person on what the ground truth was about the Soviet missile capability, its warheads, its nuclear program, and so forth. And when they came out of that room from briefing Kissinger, Kissinger had in his hand something that was radically different from what the CIA in Washington had presented to the president. Very different. They went on to start the strategic arms limitations talks, and those talks were successful, just like the intermediate nuclear force talks were successful. We had successful arms control arrangements in action. Now, they weren't all perfect, and there were violations from time to time, including by us. And you always have to make the decision, is the violation egregious enough or dangerous enough that I need to let my opponent know that I know what he does? And most of the time, the answer to that is no. We had these in place. The Trump administration stripped the rest of them out. We're now sitting here with nothing. And then everyone is surprised when an Oreshnik missile that flies at who knows what, Mach 8, Mach 9, Mach 10, 9 times or 10 times the speed of sound, and delivers 36 precision-guided bomblets or rockets, and signals that this destructive capability is equal to a small nuclear warhead, at least 5 kiloton blast. And the big message is, we don't need nuclear weapons. We can reach our targets without them, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. And in the meantime, we're saying we're going to provide air defense to the Ukrainians when we can't even defend ourselves. These people are delusional. They should be removed immediately from the government.
Speaking of delusional, you mentioned at the outset of this that one of the things that you would recommend that the incoming Trump administration does is immediately stop all the support, because then that's going to lead to, the reality that even the fiction can't be sustained any longer. And ironically, Zelensky was asked about this a couple of days ago about what he thinks would happen if that very policy were put into place.
You said the U.S. can't force you to sit at the negotiating table. What if the U.S. government cuts military funding to Ukraine?
If they will cut, I think we will lose. Of course, anyway, we will stay, we will fight. We have our production, but it's not enough to prevail. And I think it's not enough to survive. But that will be, if such choice will be American choice. So we will decide what we will have to do.
But see, I don't think that would be the result, that they are going to lose. They would only lose if he did what he said, which was we would continue to fight on without it. But if Trump comes in and says, hey, we're going to cut all this stuff so that you can seek a negotiated settlement on the best terms you can get, which will be ugly, but we'll stop the war. I mean, do you see that as his two choices?
I think Zelensky will immediately pack his bags full of cash and gold, climb onto his private jet or into his Bugatti that his wife drives between Kiev and Warsaw, and leave and fly to who knows where. Perhaps he'll fly to his Italian vineyards, this magnificent mansion that he's purchased, or perhaps he flies to Israel, which I know has offered him sanctuary. Of course, if I were he right now, I'm not sure that that's what I would do, given the very volatile situation there. But nevertheless, he'll just leave. He'll leave the place entirely. And then somebody else will step forward. I don't know if that's Zelensky sitting in London now, that I understand that MI6 and others have groomed as a potential replacement. Who knows? But this whole thing is done. It's over. The population has suffered enough. It only gets worse from here. Not only are they going to freeze in the winter, but pretty soon they're going to go hungry. They're not going to eat. They won't have any fuel for their trucks, tractors, anything in Ukraine. So people need to wise up and recognize they're dealing with probably one of the greatest scam artists in the history of mankind, and that's Zelensky. This man is the Bernie Madoff of international relations. He belongs in jail or much worse, just like Bernie Madoff did. And that's what you've got. Bernie Madoff running the show, telling people lie after lie after lie. And he's being encouraged to do that by his friends. And his friends are in power right now in Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris.
Well, and yeah, that's what I was going to say.
You can do about it till they're gone.
You're talking about a Bernie Madoff, but without this enabler here, who is ostensibly the Secretary of State of the United States, all this fiction would just be like a television show that he used to do.
Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but we're focused on this in a practical way. We set up a dedicated NATO command whose purpose is to help speed Ukraine down that path to membership. And one of the things we focused on here was making sure that that command was fully resourced. And now countries have stepped up to make sure that they have the people in place to make the command operational. That, as a practical matter, along with the reforms that Ukraine continues to engage, is what's going to move it to membership in the alliance. So Ukraine is on a clear trajectory that we've worked to establish and that we want to make sure continues through the end of this year and well into next year. And that way, the Ukrainians will be in a strong position to make the decisions that they need to make about their future. If Russia insists on continuing the aggression, Ukraine will be able to deal with it. If Russia is actually prepared to negotiate in good faith, Ukraine will be able to do it from a stronger position.
So what do you think is at play here, Doug? So that's today. That's earlier today. We're roughly 6 weeks out before he's out of power. Why would you want to say something that I can't imagine that he doesn't know what you've said here already, that there is no capacity. They will never be in NATO. Trump is not even going to entertain the possibility. Are they saying stuff like this to try to make it look like Trump pulled the rug out from under them or something? Or why would they keep saying stuff so detached from reality?
You know, when the French lost the war to the Prussians in 1871, after the war was over, inside the French general staff, they said, "Speak of it never, but think of it always." In other words, don't mention this, don't bring it up. We don't want to talk about it, but never forget it. I think that's what we're dealing with here. We're just flat out denying the truth for the reasons that I outlined. Everyone has stepped forward and joined the big lie. No one can deviate. No one can diverge from the path of lying. If they do, the whole thing collapses immediately. So you keep up the front, you maintain the facade, regardless of what it costs in American money and resources, regardless of how many Ukrainians are killed. And we now know that we've lost people in Ukraine as well, although no one will admit it, along with our NATO allies. And then when the new man takes over, if he does anything at all that moves us closer to a negotiated settlement that ultimately recognizes the ground truth, which is Russia is in charge.